we're going to talk about a very important piece in the Geodatabase, at least the enterprise Geodatabase. And that's called SDE, Spatial Database Engine, coming up. What's up, y'all? This is Hussein Nasser from iGeometry Podcast, and welcome to another Geodatabase talk, everybody. Today we're going to discuss the Spatial Database Engine, and this is actually as part of a question that has been asked on LinkedIn from Bruce Barris from Athens, Georgia. Can you maybe explain the nuances of the communication between the Geodatabase and the DBMS, the database management system? So that's why we have this episode. That's why we have this podcast. The communication, right, between the Geodatabase, right, part and the DBMS is actually nothing but a layer, right? So, and that communication, especially in the enterprise geodatabase, doesn't really exist in shape files or file geodatabases. But we have this layer, especially in the enterprise geodatabases, exist and to maintain this transaction. So, when we first created a geodatabase, right, we should have like an Oracle or PostgreSQL server should have a DBMS. Right? You create a vanilla DBMS there, and it's an empty database. You create an empty database, and then you say, okay, create a geodatabase. So use a client like Pro or ArcMap, and you say, hey, go ahead and create a geodatabase for me. And then what happened here is Pro or ArcMap starts pumping up a lot of tables and internal stored procedures, a lot of IP stuff into the database and start creating all the schema of the geodatabase, right? The reason is to support all these features of the geodatabase that we have been discussing through this entire podcast, right? All the versioning, the subtypes, domains, and many other things, right? So to start supporting that, we needed to put these in place and the licensing and all that stuff as well. All right, so now we have this in place. So to really understand this geodatabase, which is nothing but a database with a bunch of tables, you need software that can understand that, right? So ArcMap and Pro can actually understand that, right? So if you create a feature class or you want to read a feature class, where is this information starts, right? Where are this information actually stored? It's stored in the database, but there are a lot of metadata stored all along other tables as well. So to maintain, we'll get to the point eventually, guys. We'll get to the point, I promise. So to maintain the communication between the client, ArcMap Pro, even ArcGIS Server really, and the DBMS, you'll have to go through some layer that actually does the translation. And why is that? And the reason is you need that layer to start translating the essentially Arc object queries that you sent from ArcMap or ArcGIS, right, into SQL, understandable SQL for that DBMS. Does that make sense? So for instance, let's go through an example here. Let's say I want to create a feature, right? Creating a feature is, if you think about it, it is inserting a row in the DBMS, correct? Not really one-to-one there, but let's say for simplicity, it is one-to-one here. So if I want to create a feature in a class called tree, right? A feature class. My code in Arc objects or the client ArcMap or even Pro SDK will look like something like that, right? Open feature class tree and then create feature class dot create feature, and then you feature dot populate the data, and then dot store, and then you got yourself a feature in that feature class. So what is happening behind the scene? What is the communication that is happening between the client or the geodatabase here and there's not much communication between the geodatabase itself. It's actually the client, right? If you think about it. So if you are the client here and you just sent that store command, right, you will go through this layer called the Arc SDE, right, and the SDE layer. It's not much exposed to the user as it used to be, but it's there. So you'd call that, and the SDE always says, okay, you're trying to do that. I understand that your geodatabase is sitting on top of Oracle. Oracle insert, so you're trying to create a feature, so I need to do an insert statement, right? So I need to do, okay, so for Oracle, the syntax is like this: insert into blah, values, wherever. For Postgres, maybe it's different, slightly different. In this case, it's exactly the same, but a lot of SQL databases or DBMSs have different SQL, slightly different SQL statements, especially like with keywords like upper, and for SQL Server it's UCase and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's like slightly different if you think about it, right? And to understand what's going on is this SDE layer does the translation between the client queries and that. What is the benefit of this? The benefit is also stores the geometry, right? The geometry is a big thing here. So you take the geometry of that feature that you're trying to create, because it's a spatial thing, right? And based on that, we now to project it to the target spatial storage, whether Oracle Spatial or our the Esri native ST geometry or other stuff, right? Start building this other things happening behind the scene, right? It's not only a simple insert, as I said. Other stuff happening. We update the spatial index, make sure the indexes are updated. We touch other, if you're in a version, we touch other tables as well that is in the system, in the geodatabase, and so on, right? So that's essentially like the communication between the client and the geodatabase. And I think this is a very good question in general. So yeah, there you have it. So I think I discussed all I need to talk about here. The queries is essentially similar. It's just a translation layer. SD does the translation. With versioning, if you're in a version, it's slightly different. It does more stuff, right? And you can see that this layer, the benefits of this layer is, that's what I wanted. That's the last point I want to discuss before ending this podcast. And the last point here is you can virtually, theoretically, change the DBMS, right, without changing your code in ArcMap. And ArcMap will just, or Pro, will just normally work with your data. If you have your users essentially won't know that you actually changed the database. They won't actually see it because maybe if you're working client server, they need to change the connection. But even especially with the services, this is completely agnostic. The users become completely agnostic if you change the backend database, because the SDE, this layer, which just the communication between the client and the geodatabase, this takes care of this translation. So in the future, if you use the same arc object command, it will do its job to make the code work regardless which operating system you're on. This is with caveats, obviously. If you start using where clauses that are very specific to a DBMS, then you're gonna have some problems there. But that's actually essentially the benefits of an SDE. We're gonna talk about ArcGIS Server and how SDE calls in ArcGIS Server calls in SDE and does all that stuff, right? But in general, that's the communication between the geodatabase and the client. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'm gonna see you in the next one. You guys stay awesome.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.